Hello, everyone. My name's Terry Badger. I'm the managing editor at BAI and the host of the BAI Banking Strategies podcast. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Harnessing the Digital Customer Journey to Drive Customer Growth and Deepen Relationships in Uncertain Times. Before we start, just a reminder that with many of us working from home right now, there are unique technology challenges. If you have difficulties on your end, please know that a recording of today's webinar will be sent out to view on demand. And if any disruption happens on our end, we'll work to resolve it as quickly as possible. And in that event, we appreciate your patience. We know that financial services leaders are continuing to work hard to keep their employees and customers safe, while also providing a strong customer experience. Harnessing the customer journey to strengthen customer relationships and to improve customer experience is an opportunity to better differentiate and compete in a crowded marketplace, especially in uncertain times. In today's webinar, you'll hear about ways to better engage with customers and prospects and to better manage and optimize sustainable demand. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. First, we'll conclude this webinar with a question and answer period. At any time during the presentation, please type your question into the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll address your questions at the end of the presentation. Secondly, we'll be using a polling feature during today's webinar. Please note that you will not see the polling questions if you are viewing the presentation in the full screen mode. So I ask that you minimize your screen so that you can participate in today's polling. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, you'll see an online evaluation on your screen. Your feedback is important to BAI as we strive to address the key issues impacting the industry, especially in today's unique business environment. So please take a few minutes to complete the survey. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Jennifer Harmel is an executive vice president and serves as the Financial Services Practice Lead at ANNUITAS. Jennifer leads all aspects of the organization's strategy and technology practice areas, ensuring that teams are building best-in-class solutions for clients ranging from global enterprises to high-growth technology. And Lauren Goldstein is the Chief Revenue Officer at ANNUITAS. Lauren helps marketing and sales leaders at growth-focused organizations transform their demand marketing to drive profitable revenue growth and excellent customer experiences. Additionally, Lauren co-founded Women in Revenue, a nonprofit built to empower women in sales and marketing with education, mentorship, and networking opportunities. So Lauren, let me hand it off to you now.
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Before we set the agenda and kind of jump into the core of what Terry was sharing earlier, I wanted to just kind of do a moment to level set, just to kind of remind us the state that we're all in, not just because of what's happening in the world, but as sales and marketing and technology leaders, despite our ultimate desire to create great customer experiences, there's also that very humbling conversation that we have with ourselves on a regular basis, really trying to defend what is it all in service of. And so I love to start with some of these cartoons as a way to remind us that we are here to talk about the importance of the customer journey. But as sales and marketing leaders, we also need to make sure that everything that we do is accountable and driving toward the growth of our businesses. So in this quick comment, you see a CFO probably talking to her head of marketing about, what the purpose is, and it's, brand awareness and affinity and sentiment. But at the end of the day, what she wants to know, what I wants to know is, well, how about in terms that I can understand, like EBITDA? And so we do need to remember that some of the challenges that we're up against is how do we make sure that we're driving? So what's typically happening today, and Jennifer will get into some of the issues specific to financial services, is that we are actually making progress. See data that says we're making progress as brands, doing a better job understanding our buyers and developing content that's relevant to them. But at the end of the day, 82% of our marketing is wrong place, wrong time. And this is a statistic from Accenture Interactive, which means that we might be having the right things to say, but we're committing random acts of marketing. We're pushing these messages out into a market in a way that's not necessarily useful and in many ways is damaging the customer experience that we're trying to create. And furthermore, companies on that notion of random acts of marketing are putting out a lot of volume. And as we intuitively know, lots of messages is not necessarily the right answer. So we need to look at how we resolve that. Because in fact, what we're doing is we're really creating more and more bad experiences for our customers. So as you can see from this Forrester statistic, there's not a lot of brands out there that are really kind of meeting and or exceeding customer expectation. And it is because maybe we're getting better at the content of the content, but we still need to figure out that right time, right place. And by the way, there have been a lot of changes happening in the last 30 to 60 days that are really making us and our need to refine that digital experience so much more important. Because as financial services organizations, now more than ever, our customers are relying on us to deliver a great experience online. They can't come into branches. They can't meet with our bankers one-on-one. So how do we really create a great opportunity online? And that's really what we're here today to address. That's what this notion of harnessing the digital customer journey to drive growth and deepen relationships is all about. So as I pass the torch to Jennifer in just a moment, what she'll be taking us through is a deeper dive into some of the insights facing financial services, 5 steps to achieve best practice, and some pragmatic points of where do you start. And we will make sure to leave at least 10 or so minutes at the end for some Q&A. So please feel free to add questions to Q&A throughout, and then we will hold those questions and make sure that we have time to answer them in the end. So with all that being said, Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about where do we start? So over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Lauren. Before I dive in, though, I'd really just like to say a big thank you to everybody, on this webinar today in the financial services industry. I know you guys are probably all working overtime and helping individuals and businesses out there stay financially sound right now. I feel like it's kind of the elephant in the room, and I'd be remiss if I didn't give a quick thank you to all of you. So let's dive in here and talk a little bit about what financial services organizations are struggling with today. And some of these struggles are fairly common across all industries, but some of them are particularly prevalent within this space. First step would be the challenge to digitally engage customers. This is an industry that is traditionally fairly reliant on a lot of manual processes, and what those do is they tend to expose a lot of weaknesses. So financial services organizations are really trying to digitize and automate as much as possible. Second would be delivering lead to revenue visibility, right? Thinking back to Lauren's cartoon earlier, kind of the holy grail, being able to see for every dollar I invest in my marketing activity, what's the ROI of that? What am I getting at the end of the funnel at the end of the day? The third is improving and personalizing the customer experience. And that might sound fairly aspirational to some folks, and we're going to talk a little bit more about personalization later on, but that is a huge focus of many organizations today. Leveraging tech investments is something that we see, pretty much across all industries, but it's, cases where businesses have invested tons of money in very sophisticated platforms, but they're failing to really use them to their full capability. Extremely common out there today. And then finally, empowering our bankers or our sellers with more insight, right? More visibility into what has marketing done to create this lead that marketing deems important enough for sales to talk to, for example, and just having a deeper understanding of customers and what their journey was from a digital perspective. So I think it's time for the first of 2 polls we're going to do today, asking what is your top challenge?
So we'd love to hear everyone's response. I think that we're going to pull that poll onto the screen so that everyone can take a look at it. And as Jennifer outlined, there are a handful of different options here that she just walked through. Digitally engage customers, deliver lead to revenue visibility, improve, personalize the customer experience, fully leverage technology investments, empower sales and bankers with more insights. And we'd love to hear your vote, mostly because we want to make sure as we walk through the rest of the presentation that we really cater it to what we're seeing. So we'll just give a couple more seconds here. It looks like we're definitely getting some good input here and folks are still weighing in, but would love to really hear what you're seeing. It sounds like, Jennifer, we have some kind of clear path here. So yeah, we'll definitely make sure that we, so okay, this is really helpful. Let's go ahead and close the poll now, and we'll move on.
Yeah, so thanks for that, everybody who participated in that poll. And again, there'll be another one a little bit later in the presentation. But the results of that are, I kind of chuckle. I'm not terribly surprised. There's huge emphasis on personalization these days and around the customer experience. And Laura and I had the opportunity to speak with Chris Young the other day, who really heads up the FSI space within Adobe. And we just popped a quote in here that we felt was super relevant, right? Experience matters pretty much now more than ever, right? And we're shifting to centricity, connecting data, accelerating content, automating the personalization, and managing our customers' journeys. And as I said, it's now more, or rather, as he said, now more important and more valuable than ever. And it was really validating to me to hear this because it's very in line with what we're also seeing across our clients. And Chris, is out each and every day talking to countless folks in this space. So there are obviously some marketplace drivers, right, that are making all of us focus on things like digitizing, improving the experience and personalizing the experience. And this is an almost probably famous quote at this point from a Fortune 500 chairman at a financial services firm who recognized that this is actually becoming less of a banking business and more of a technology business, with so much emphasis on automating and digitizing. And so it lends itself to, to the question of how should we all pivot? And if we need to be like more of a technology business, what do technology businesses do really well? Some quotes that we ourselves heard from our clients, on the front lines of financial services, and these were all VPs, either in the business development group or just really out on the front lines, talking about, that first one there, if I could just segment my portfolio and have marketing keep someone, quote unquote, warm for me while I'm focused on the others, that would be fantastic, right? So speaking to the need of automating, or not even necessarily automated, but having the capability to nurture and keep things warm. This other quote, we need support. I can't cover all the names as efficiently and quickly as if it was all automated. Speaking to automation very, very clearly there, that we need to be scalable, right? And then lastly, just from a bandwidth standpoint, it's not effective or fair to bring a banker in too early, right? To send leads to a banker when those leads aren't truly ready to speak to the banker. And there's a fine line to bring them in at the right time. So talking about lead management and figuring out, how do you find that balance between giving sales, the leads that they need, but giving them truly qualified leads at the same time. And so as I said before, if we need to be more of a technology business and less of a banking business, what are the things that we need to do? So we're going to talk about 5 elements of demand marketing transformation. First up, very, very critical, understanding your customer's journey and then operationalizing around that. Secondly, integrating your content marketing and your lead management, right? How can you leverage those to really maximize that lead management process? Shift to a perpetual state, which is something maybe you have not heard of and you're kind of going, what in the world does that mean? I'll definitely explain that and show you some kind of hypothetical examples. Operationalizing against outcomes, right? How do you, getting back to the lead to revenue visibility, how do I look at metrics and really, make them effective and make decisions on how to improve what I'm doing today? And then finally, aligning our technology stack to the process, right? Not leading with technology, but leading with the process. So first, understanding the buying journey. What do we mean by that? At Annuitas, we believe very, very wholeheartedly that customer success is the result of understanding your customers and your prospects and how they want to engage. And I would even go so far as to say not even just how they want to engage, but also when they want to engage and who wants to engage. We all know that it's typically not just one person you're selling to, but what we call a buying committee who you have to convince. So how do we do that? We first start with doing a ton of research, quite honestly, both primary and secondary research. And we really craft all of that research or focus all of that research around 6 key areas. Macro trends, taking a look at really what's going on out there in the industry. What are people talking about from a thought leadership perspective? And that can greatly inform what type of content you need to produce and create. What are the buyer's pain points? What's keeping them up at night? Again, you need to know this so that your content can be super relevant. Of course, today, the buyer pain points are pretty clear, but typically not so much. Change management is always key, right? From, organizationally, doing a demand transformation is a huge endeavor. And so being able to identify internally, how can you really make sure that you're carrying the right people along and getting them on board with the transformation? Decision-making process is just what it says it is. Understanding what are the steps that your buyers and your audience go through when making a purchasing decision or thinking about switching banks, for example. Content consumption, where does your audience go to get smart about something? When there's something keeping them up at night, what are they Googling, right? Or what do they rely on their peers? Do they rely on associations? And what formats even do they like their content in? And then finally, we do some research around what we call optimizing conversion. This is an effort to identify internally what are some of the hindrances, roadblocks that you might encounter along the way. Things like being aware that there, for example, and this is fairly common, a divide between sales and marketing, that everybody's really not on the same page. And another example, perhaps they're not on the same page around how to even define a qualified lead. And so doing research around these 6 areas will really serve you well to inform everything else in your transformation. And it helps you start to think about, how do I want to map out the buyer journey? And how do I want to create my content and my lead management framework to align to that? At the highest level, we think of the buyer journey in terms of these 3 steps. First of all, how are you going to engage your audience, right? What type of content do you need? It's a mix of both inbound and outbound channels to engage them and get them interested and pull your audience into your database, where you can then move to the second step of nurture, right? And that's a continuation of the conversation, moving them from thought leadership topics to more product or solution specific topics. And then finally, of course, we all want to move to convert, right? This is the place and time where we decide that somebody is actually ready to talk to sales or to a banker, and we kind of pass them off from an automated approach to a live person approach. And of course, I don't want to forget that included in this, although it may not depict this visually, this isn't just a one-time process, right? This would cover your cross-sell, your upsell, and even your retention. So somebody could go through this process, and hopefully they would, multiple times. As we start to dig deeper and deeper into mapping out the steps that your buyers go through, I think, again, engage, nurture, convert, there would also be that 4th step that I just alluded to. This is an actual example from a financial services client of ours where our first layer down of kind of peeling the onion was to map out, okay, within the engage stage, that top of the funnel, right, when somebody first starts talking to you, how many steps should there be in that? Is it a long period of engagement, or is it a shorter one for more of a transactional sale? Now, typically in financial services, the sales process is quite long, as you all well know. And so we have, a good number of steps in here in the engage process. So first, they're thinking about industry trends most likely. Then they might dive into some key issues and implications. Then they're ready to maybe talk about some recommended solutions. And then typically there's going to be some type of compelling event that shifts them from early stage into middle stage. It shifts them from thinking hypothetically to saying, gosh, I really need to make a purchase or I need to make a change. Then they start truly exploring all of their options. They might come up with a short list of solutions at that point. And inevitably, marketing is going to, at that point, say, okay, you're probably ready to talk to sales. There's a handoff. And then there are some additional stages within this convert or late stage content where, as sales is moving someone through those opportunity stages, you'll also want some appropriate content to address where people are in the buying cycle. And then, of course, from a post-sale perspective, you would also want to create some content that might help onboard, ensure some initial success of a new customer, make sure that they have continued success, and then, of course, expand that success with things, cross-sell and upsell efforts, for example. And again, I'm peeling back the layers of the onion here. So let me get my slide to progress there. Once you've identified what these steps are, you would want to go down to a deeper level of saying, well, exactly what type of content do we think we need to really be relevant and speak to these potential buyers at each step? So just for example, industry trends, you might want some thought leadership content around talent shortage or this drive for digital transformation that's pervasive out there today. Or you might want to talk about the concept of agile business, just to give you a few examples. Obviously, from here, you would literally go into, producing and I'm writing a creative brief for each one of these pieces of content. Juggling with my slide progressor here. So moving on to number 2 of our best practices. Once you have all of this content, all of these content ideas done, how do you make sure that you integrate that with lead management? Because content isn't just for content's sake. How can you use it? And the beautiful thing is when you map out the buying process and build your content model this way, the content can be indicative of where someone is in their buying process, right? So if somebody engages with you, your business the first time, and they engage with a piece of content that you have mapped to later in the buying process, guess what? You can be pretty assured in making an assumption of where they are, and you can speak accordingly and score them accordingly on the back end, right? So we've already done step 1. We've mapped content to the steps of the buying process. Step number 2 would be to assign lead qualification scores to the content stages. And this is very easy to do if you've got, a marketing automation platform, something like maybe Marketo or, Adobe Target to do. And so this is just a very hypothetical example, but for early stage content, you might do something like give 50 points every time somebody downloads an early stage piece of content. Whereas later in the funnel, later in your stages, you might give them 65 points. And once somebody goes into this middle stage bucket of content, you might give them 100 points per content download. Not only does this allow you to see where somebody most likely is in their buying process, it also allows you to hand that person off to sales quicker if they're digesting later stage content. So super helpful. And another part of leveraging your content is, of course, personalization, right? So if memory serves me correctly, I think 75% of the people who answered poll number 1 said personalization was their key challenge, and I'm interested to dive a little bit more into that. But just a couple of examples of how you might do some personalization on your website, right? So for unknown buyers, obviously, right, you don't know anything about them. You certainly haven't captured any demographic information about the person, right? You don't necessarily know what industry they're in or where they're located, or certainly you wouldn't have the opportunity to segment them. So what you do know is what page are they on that obviously interested them, and any other additional pages they might have viewed in the past, right? And based off of that, you could make some assumptions. So looking at whatever the content is on that page and what stage that content is mapped to, you might want to then serve up later stage content, because you always want to be trying to push somebody further down the funnel. You might also be able to leverage some topical tags based on whatever content is on the page that they're visiting. Is it industry specific? Is it segment specific? Then again, serve up more content that is aligned to that industry and that segment, for example. This is different from when you have a known buyers, and obviously here there's a lot more you can leverage. You would leverage the known attributes and the behavior about that buyer, as well as the page, to personalize whatever the featured content is. So again, here you would know what stage of the content. Let's serve up the next stage of content. Let's look at what the topical tags are. You know, let's make sure that, again, we're always serving up content that is trying to push them further down the funnel. And so just in time for poll question number 2, to what degree is everyone using personalization today?
So we'd love to have everyone take a couple seconds and just answer this poll. To what degree are you personalizing today? Not at all. Maybe you're just getting started. Maybe you're doing a little bit of experimenting with it. Or for those that are really rocking it, let us know. We'd love to know who's rocking it. And I think that, as Jennifer has stated, this notion of how we really personalize, which means, again, going back to the earlier statistics, it's not just about having great content, but it's also making it right time, right place. So we'll just give everyone another moment or two to answer. And it looks like we actually have some nice balance kind of throughout, but that there's a lot of opportunity to really kind of take it further. And in fact, this may be one area that we are constantly, experimenting. So it's nice to see that that there's a lot of you out there experimenting. All right, maybe just another second. And it looks like people are pretty completed with answering the question. So let's close the poll, and Jennifer will send it back to you.
Great. Thanks again, everybody. So again, not surprising, and I want to make you guys all feel a little bit better about your answers, actually. This is from an Adobe survey specifically around personalization, which said that, highlighted that 92% of marketers say, yeah, we recognize that personalization is a must and we really want to do it. However, 91% of the senior decision makers say that their companies need to improve the capabilities. So really driving home that message, yes, we all want to do it. Do we all necessarily know how to do it, or are we there yet? Most likely no. So again, thanks for that. Step number 3 of our best practices we want to talk you through today is operationalizing buyer insight. And I'm sorry, portion number 2, how do we, so we've talked about kind of the why and some of that. Now we want to talk about how, exactly how do we operationalize all of these insights. So best practice number 3, shifting to a perpetual state. What does that mean? The buying process for financial services, as I stated earlier, is typically quite long. I think today, amid the COVID-19 crisis, it could be short, right? Somebody could be having a really bad experience, and it would be a huge impetus to shift, especially right now. But typically, it can be quite long. And one thing that's for sure, it is not necessarily linear, meaning buyers can enter as well as exit the process at any stage. So think back a few slides ago where we had all those boxes and we were mapping out, the buying process, and I kind of walked you through it as if it's linear. Please do not misunderstand me. Those steps do all have to be mapped out, but again, somebody could enter 3 steps in or 5 steps in, guess what? They could potentially even go backwards in the process. And so what this means, and this is really important to understand, this translates into a need for us to be prepared with content at every stage and process flows that accommodate for every possible situation. This is a big mistake that a lot of marketers make today, where it's just an ad hoc approach, right? You've got kind of a database of names, and that's all it is. It's just a database of names versus a database of people who you know where they are in their journey. And so when you think about shifting to a perpetual state, this is really a visual to help there, we're talking about moving from tactical demand to strategic demand. Tactical demand being that vendor push, being us as a business just pushing communications and content out to our audience, sitting back and praying that it resonates, but not really being thoughtful or strategic about it, not knowing who we're targeting. It's very outbound oriented, less inbound oriented. And again, it's periodic, it's short term. It's just, hey, we need to get a newsletter out this month. And again, let's sit back and pray that it performs. Versus over on the right, that more strategic approach, right? Something that is perpetual, where instead of saying, oh, every month, what are we going to do to drive leads? You actually have a perpetual engine built that is based more on a buyer pull than a vendor push, right? When that engine is perpetual and it is up and running, it is armed and loaded for your buyers to come to you when they need something, right? There's much more emphasis on inbound, understandably so, and perpetual meaning it is always on and it is highly sustainable. So what might that look like? And again, thinking back to what I just said, hey, we have to be armed for people to come in at any stage. This is definitely not linear. This is actually something that happens quite often, right? So you might have somebody that does, as I said, doesn't enter at step 1, industry trends. No, the first time they engage with you is actually in the middle stage of your funnel under solution exploration. Let's say they find some content. They're Googling an issue that's really keeping them up at night that they know they need to solve, and they find a piece of content that really speaks to them. Well, then what happens? You're going to put them into your nurturable database, and you're going to send them some follow-up emails. But what happens if they don't respond to your follow-ups? And let's say you send them several, right? We all know this is highly possible. So what do we do? Sorry, guys, my click forward's a little slow here. So what would happen is that person should flow in some sort of a re-engagement effort, right? We don't give up here. We don't just leave them in a black hole. And conversely, we don't pick up the phone and call them because they haven't done anything that's indicative to us that they're actually ready to make a move or talk to somebody in sales. So we flow them into this re-engagement effort, and we have to be prepared to do that. Now let's say that person actually responds to the re-engagement effort. So they slow down, they're unresponsive for a while, but then they start responding again. And we decide, again, an agreement between marketing and sales, that that's indicative that that person should be handed off to sales. So we hand them off, somebody in the sales or your BDR organization talks to them, and that person in sales decides, actually, this person really isn't qualified for whatever reason. Maybe they don't have budget yet, or maybe they lied on some information that they gave us, and we just, for whatever reason, say, hey, they need more nurturing. We need to enable sales to be able to turn that person back for additional nurturing. And maybe they need to be turned back all the way to earlier stages of content. But what these little hypothetical drawings show you, and I think they do a good job of depicting, is, again, somebody could come in at any point in the process. They can go forwards and backwards, and we've got to be prepared for everything. Step number 4, optimizing against outcomes. So we can build fantastic dashboards, and we do, and you probably do too, and that's wonderful. But it's quite another thing to not just build the dashboards, but be able to act on them. And that's really the secret sauce. right? And so I just wanted to show a couple of examples, again, specific to content, and I'm glad I picked content since personalization ended up being such a big focus or challenge for this audience. But not just looking or measuring content KPIs in terms of, oh, how many opens or clicks or downloads did we get? That's certainly good, but let's take it a step further to say, not only how many people saw that content, but at what stage in the funnel are those people now? So you'll see that, I know this might be a little bit hard to read, but you'll see different colors. So each row is a different piece of content, and each color is representative of where the folks who have touched that content are in your demand funnel. And so for me, I would much rather have 100 touches of a piece of content, but of those 100 have 20 people that turned into closed-won deals, than have 1,000 people that touched a piece of content where none of them turned into closed-won deals. There's that engagement lens, but then there's that lead to revenue lens that we also need to use. Also taking a look at some content KPIs, elasticity. Elasticity is taking a look at, out of everybody that's looked at a piece of content, what percentage of them have actually moved to a later stage? In this case, we're taking a look at what percentage of people actually turned into revenue or a closed-won deal. And you'll see here we've said anything above a certain percentage we deem significant. This can really help you make decisions, not just on what type of content should you develop more of or perhaps get rid of, but also what content should you be using where in the funnel. If content's driving great engagement, perhaps you want to really use it in your inbound channels. If it's something that's really driving to a closed-won deal, perhaps you want to use it a bit later in your nurture efforts. And just to plug for exactly why you want to take this approach. Why should you build this perpetual engine aside from all the reasons I've already given you? It's down to brass tacks, it's down to numbers. Companies who do this, when we compare their results to industry benchmarks, such as those coming out of Forrester, for example, or Series Decisions, just looking at qualified lead to opportunity conversion, industry benchmark is a little over 30%, versus those that we have benchmarked across all of our clients over the years who follow this perpetual demand generation approach. It's almost a 42% increase over that benchmark. Looking at the entire funnel, initial engagement, all the way down to closed-won deals, believe it or not, the industry benchmark is a measly 0.3%, right? That's a lot of marketing dollars to spend to engage folks and get them in the funnel and nurture them to actually only close 0.3%. When you build this perpetual engine, you get 1.4%. That's a 366% increase over industry benchmarks. We know that this process or this approach works. And finally, poor technology always gets pushed to the back, but it is definitely not the least important part. It is a very, very important component. It is what powers this perpetual engine. However, you don't want to lead with the tech stack. We see a lot of businesses make that mistake. They say, hey, we bought marketing automation. It's going to solve all of our problems. And it never does. Like I said earlier, it's like, buying a Ferrari and leaving it sitting in the garage. How you want to approach your tech stack is thinking about it from a demand-centric approach, right? What should the user experience be for your buyers? What should it be for your marketers? And what should it be for sales? So thinking about, your CMS, your marketing automation platform, and your CRM. And this is an actual example, diving in a little bit deeper. What are the actions and what are the necessities out of those three platforms? In this case, we had Marketo as the marketing automation system, Salesforce as your sales interface, and then AEM from Adobe Experience Manager, really powering all of the personalization. So it was managing all of the content pages. It was using Marketo forms for progressive profiling and really running all of the personalization data and rules with Marketo, running a lot more of the back-end processes from a lead management perspective, right? So things like your lead scoring, all of your lead qualification management, as well as the logic behind your outbound nurture and things we call fulfillment emails. And then, of course, Salesforce.com, as I said, being your sales interface for pipeline management. So I've thrown a lot at you today, and I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions. But hearing all of this, you might be, where do I get started? This sounds, it is a big transformation, and it might, hopefully not, but probably does feel a little overwhelming. And so just some tales from the Crypt from years and years of personal experience I will leave you with. One is take the crawl, walk, run approach. You need to be patient. This does not happen overnight. In fact, when we do this, we do it in phases that can take 9-10 months to be completely through all of the phases. So be patient. 2, and this is a repeat, but it's a repeat for a reason. Seek to understand your buyers, their segmentation, and their journey. There's no reason not to start on that now. There's nothing better than reaching out and asking your buyers what they want and what's relevant to them. Go ahead and look for gaps internally. Not just in your people, your resourcing, your own process, what content you have, as well as your technology, because you'll want to be filling these gaps as you're building your strategy. Leverage your technology strategically. I've seen a lot of businesses that have so many little, they just buy a piece of technology one right after the other, when the reality is that they just had 3 or 4 really, really good parts of their tech stack that could probably actually alleviate some of the others. And then finally, don't be hesitant to ask for help. Lots of great organizations out there, lots of good data. As I said, this isn't easy, but when you do follow this approach, the results are just magnificent. So I think I'm going to hand it back over to Lauren and see if we have any questions.
Great, Jennifer, thank you so much. And before we jump into the Q&A, I'd like to encourage everyone, first of all, thank you for joining, but encourage you all to take a few moments to fill out the survey that should now be live on your screen, or momentarily will be live on your screen. And while we're multitasking with the survey, I do want to definitely take a look at some of the questions that have come in as we have, as Jennifer has been sharing the great insights for how to make the shift. So Jennifer, the first question that's come in that I would love to have you answer is, how critical is it to begin with the buyer segmentation and buyer journey insights?
Oh gosh, super critical. I mean, I feel like if you don't start with that, you're really flying blind. A lot of businesses out there, they really think that they know their customers, but when we start asking questions, it turns out they really don't. And the solution's actually really easy. Think about it. Just go out there and ask. When's the last time a lot of marketers actually got an opportunity to visit with customers and prospects? It doesn't happen that often. So I can't stress the importance of it enough.
And just as a follow-on to that, I mean, does it have to take a long time to do it? Or, I mean, what do you recommend? I mean, does it have to be like a big in-depth, like several months of research, or
no
organizations?
Yeah, for us, I'll tell you, when we do it, we typically spend about a month on it. It shouldn't take you a long, this isn't quantitative research that I'm talking about, it's more qualitative research, although the quantitative would certainly help. I think a key to it is being pretty standardized around what you're researching. And again, you'll all get copies of this deck, but think back to the beginning, those 6 different areas, right? That can be really helpful so that you're just super dialed on what are the questions you're trying to answer in your research.
Another question that has actually popped up a couple of times is, how important is it to involve bankers and other sales leadership in this kind of initiative?
Oh gosh, thank you. That's a great question and something I didn't touch on here, but that is incredibly important. Making sure, I mean, look, those are the people that are out there on the front lines, right? Who know better than anybody, or should know better than anybody, what are your prospects' pain points? What's going to be relevant to them? So it's critical for that reason. It's also critical to get marketing and sales alignment, right? You don't want marketing spending a ton of time, effort, resources, money to generate leads that sales and bankers are just going to ultimately say, no, those aren't leads. You need to drive alignment to make everybody super efficient in the whole process.
Fantastic. And do you have any, I guess, kind of tried and true, ways that you've done that, whether it's, pulling people together in a discussion, or whether it's, any kind of change management tricks that you could share with us?
Yeah, there are several. Early on in the engagement, as you're building your strategy or your blueprint for what your approach is going to be, you definitely want to pull those people into your deep dive meetings. We like to have representation from the sales organization at all of those meetings. And by representation, I don't mean just one person. I mean, sales leadership as well as feet on the street, sales representation. And then as you move forward into implementation and certainly optimizing your program, you want to keep them involved. I mean, look, pulling them in early ensures that you have internal cheerleaders in the sales organization. And that's super helpful. When sales starts hearing that the process is going to change and the types of leads they're going to start getting is going to change, that can strike serious anxiety in an organization. But if you have sales kind of on board from the get-go, they can really help you drive that change throughout the organization. And then, as I said, ongoing, moving forward into implementation and optimization, keeping them informed and getting their feedback, having that feedback loop for what's working and what's not is important as well. Of course, you're going to have, you should have your dashboards and your analytics, but on top of that, just the anecdotal information you'll get from the sales organization will be incredibly valuable too.
Great, thank you so much. I've got one more question here, but just a reminder, if there's anybody else on the line that wants to add a question in the Q&A pane, please do it. But let's wrap with this one question unless some other questions pop in. Last question, you showcase what success looks like. When does it fail?
That's another good question. I would say, not just because they're top of mind because you just asked it, but the couple of things that we just covered, I've seen it fail when there's not alignment. It fails when the right people aren't part of the process. So change management is incredibly important. It's identifying who the champions are internally, making sure that they're on board, informed all along the way is really important. Another way that I've seen it fall down is, again, just being, technology led or not really doing the upfront research. You can't get in an incredible hurry with this. It's better to do it right than to do it super quickly.
And Jennifer, actually, one additional question came in, and the question is, how long do you recommend handling the data without being too agile or not agile enough, walking the fine line of change for change's sake? And if I'm understanding this question correctly, I think it's kind of that balance of, moving to move or change to change, the analysis versus the action. That's how I'm interpreting this. But what are your thoughts here?
Asking from an analytics perspective?
So let's take a look at it from both an analytics and perhaps from a change management perspective, since I don't have direct access to this great question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm completely understanding the question around how long do you hang on to the data.
Yeah, so I think from an analytics perspective?
Yeah, meaning how far back do we look, with the data? I think that's hard. That so much of that depends on your specific buying process. I mean, we work with clients where the buying process can be 2-3 years long, and so obviously you want to look at a super long period of data to be able to really start to understand what the critical path is from engaged to closed won. There are other companies obviously we work with who are highly transactional in nature, and so I think that should probably be the driver, is what does the buying process look like. But again, I hope I understood the question correctly.
I think that point of critical path and having enough time and insights into the data in order to be able to map that critical path to see first touch engagement all the way through to closed won or closed lost, I think that's the important part. So to your point, that is really variable for every organization based on whatever that duration is of the life cycle around a particular, whether it's a pre-sales motion or a customer life cycle journey. So I do think it's variable, but having that historical data is important. All right, well, with that last question being answered, I think, again, we want to thank everyone. And Terry, I think this is when we pass the ball back to you to wrap us up.
That is correct, and nicely done. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your expertise and your insights with us today. As a follow-up to today's webinar, everyone who was on the call will receive an email within 24 hours from BAI. That will include a link to the recording of today's webinar, and I encourage you to share the link with your team or other peers who you think may benefit from the insights shared today. You can learn more about BAI and other thought leadership opportunities, such as the BAI Banking Strategies podcast on our website. That's bai.org. And you can also find the latest tools and resources BAI has created related to COVID-19 on our homepage. Again, bai.org. This concludes our session. I'm Terry Badger, Managing Editor at BAI. Thank you again for joining us, and stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.